Then a Sports Central, we go for a college football game preview and prediction on the Week 6 matchup between the Kentucky Wildcats and the Georgia Bulldogs. A matchup between a team at the top and a team who is on the rise as we look forward to Week 6. You got Georgia, obviously back-to-back national champions. There is a good chance this team is on the road to a third straight national championship this season. But Kentucky on the other side, this team is emerging as a very dangerous team in the SEC. 5-0 on the season, ranked in the top 20. This is a talented football team capable of upsetting some big-name teams this season. So, massive matchup coming up here in Week 6. We'll be going over a full game preview and prediction on this matchup here today. Let's get started with your team trends. Kentucky beat Florida last week 33-14. Florida being ranked 22nd in the country last week. Pretty solid football team, and Kentucky made it look easy last week, and this team is 5-0 to start the season. And I mean, this is a Kentucky team that has definitely flown under the radar so far this season. They're finally 5-0, finally starting to get some attention, but this is a team that definitely should not be underestimated at this point. Devin Leary is a quarterback. We know what he can do. He was incredible at NC State. Kind of a bumpy start with Kentucky, but this is a team with a very high ceiling, I think, and very much capable of upsetting some big-name teams in the SEC. But Georgia on the other side just beat Auburn 27-20. Auburn really kept it close, and that was kind of the same story with that South Carolina matchup back in Week 3. South Carolina was they were hot at the start of that game, led it for a long time, and then in the second half, Georgia got it done. Kind of similar to the Auburn matchup, but that's not going to work every game for Georgia. I mean, starting fast is going to be critical in a lot of the big games against better football teams, and this is, I would say, definitely the best team that Georgia's played to date. So, I mean, for Georgia, 5-0 to start the season, ranked as the top team in the country, rightfully so. You got a strong argument for that, as this team has obviously won back-to-back natties. But Georgia isn't quite as dominant as we've seen the past couple of seasons so far, and considering they really haven't played anyone too impressive yet, there's reason to say that for sure. But I mean, for Georgia, they have yet to prove it, and this is the first step in really proving that they belong as a top team in the country this season. But, I mean, they got many opportunities to do that. Georgia ahead, obviously got Kentucky, and then November is really where the tests begin for the Bulldogs. But games be on Saturday, October 7th in Athens. Georgia is the home team for this matchup, 7 p.m. Eastern. Spread's going with Georgia by 14.5. So, Georgia's favored by a couple of touchdowns. Honestly, as you would expect, over-under is 48, and so overall Georgia pretty heavy favorite for this one, 86% on the FPI as well. Series history, Georgia leads at 62-12. Kentucky has hardly beaten Georgia in the history of this matchup. Georgia's won 13 straight, speaking of which. It's been a long time since the Wildcats have beaten Georgia. Last time Kentucky won was 2009. Your stat comparison, Kentucky 9th in the country in points per game, 16th in points allowed. This is a well-rounded football team in Kentucky. They are 90th in pass yards a game, but you got to remember, too, Devin Leary is still warming up with Kentucky. He's a very talented quarterback, one of the best in the country, I would argue. So, I mean, despite the numbers being a bit low right now, I wouldn't be surprised if, give him a couple more weeks, this team is definitely in that top 60 or so. But rush yards, this team has been incredible. 30th in the country as of right now. Can't forget about Ray Davis, who's had a really strong start for Kentucky. And then pass defense 46th, rush defense 5th. So a strong rushing defense with Kentucky. But for Georgia, 18th in the country in points per game, 15th in points allowed. One of the top passing offenses in the country. Carson Beck off to a nice start at quarterback, nearly 1,500 yards of passing, along with 7 touchdowns and 2 picks. And defensively, this team great as always. But I mean, once again, this hasn't been quite as dominant of a defense as we've seen the past couple of years. So still got to see this defense show up and prove it. And statistically, I mean, you could make an argument that Kentucky is the better team so far this season, just except for the passing game. But Georgia, the numbers haven't really proven it yet. I mean, this is still, I'm not trying to underestimate Georgia here. I know it sounds like I'm kind of slamming them, but it's just that out of a back-to-back national title team, ranked number 1 in the country, we really haven't seen them be that dominant team that we've seen the past couple of years quite yet. But your recent matchups, Kentucky beat Florida 33-14. Obviously, the nice win over Vanderbilt. Beat up Akron, beat Eastern Kentucky, and also beat Ball State by 30. But for Georgia, obviously 2 conference games so far. Beat Auburn, beat South Carolina. Dominated UAB, Ball State, and UT Martin also before that. Your key points for this one, both teams 5-0. Kentucky, I mean, this team showed their potential last week. Florida was the best team that they had played all season. And honestly, heading into that Florida matchup, I did have a few question marks about Kentucky. I mean, you consider the close game against Eastern Kentucky in week 2. That one kind of turned me off of the Wildcats there for the next couple of weeks. But the way this team played against a good Florida team, scored 33, held their offense really well. I was really impressed with this team, and I feel like if they play up to their competition like that and they can beat a good Florida football team like that, this Kentucky team has got a high ceiling this season, and it seems like they're only getting better as well. And Ray Davis, got to keep an eye on him. He is a true threat in the backfield, maybe one of the best running backs in the country so far this season, nearly 600 yards of offense and 8 touchdowns for him. So, I mean, this is a talented team, especially in the backfield, offensively, a lot of potential. And, I mean, you look at Georgia on the other side, this team hasn't been very dominant yet, but this is a team that, talent-wise, is built to go all the way. They have, I mean, a little bit of inexperience in some areas. Obviously, Brock Bowers is incredible. He is probably the best player on this offense, one of the best tight ends in the country. I'd say he's the best tight end in the country. He's been playing incredible so far this season. That has not changed one bit. But for Georgia, home field advantage, obviously a crucial matchup for this team. I feel like Georgia's kind of due at this point for a dominant win over a ranked opponent, especially being ranked number 1 right now. So, I mean, this is a huge opportunity for them. That's kind of what they're thinking. But obviously, I mean, they should not go into this matchup thinking that they're going to dominate Kentucky, because Wildcats are also an excellent team. And speaking of which, for Wildcats, this is a hot team with, I mean, what a statement win this could be for Kentucky moving forward. This is a team that is very much on the rise right now. And you consider as well, I mean, we're still early on in the season to the point where, I mean, if Kentucky wins this matchup, puts them at 3-0 in conference, 6-0 overall, you could consider them the favorite in the SEC East moving into week 7 if they can knock off Georgia here. But obviously, that is not an easy thing to say, because Georgia is an incredible football team that is stacked all around. And with that, let's get to the prediction here for Kentucky and Georgia coming up here in week 6 of action. And I'm going to be going with the favorite here, Georgia. 24-20 is my predicted final score, but it's going to be close. I think Kentucky really puts up a fight here and keeps it close. I mean, we have seen that so far this season. Auburn kept it close with Georgia. South Carolina kept it close with the Georgia. 2 teams in the SEC that are really, I mean, they're good football teams, but they're not terribly impressive so far. I mean, South Carolina is 2-3 at this point in the season. So all things considered, I think Kentucky really puts up a fight here. They cover the spread and keep it close, but Georgia finds a way in the end. And that's something for the Bulldogs, is this team has found a way in each of their games so far this season. So I'm going to say 60% towards Georgia. I think this is a closer game than many expect. Over-under is 48.5. I'm taking the under. Kentucky to cover the spread in the end. I mean, Kentucky is very much able to win this game. They have got momentum on their side. They're experienced. They're built to win this season as well. I mean, so this is a matchup to really keep an eye on. Definitely a sneaky one coming up here in week 6. But with that, let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this matchup. And I appreciate you guys all watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.